Folks, it's our 3-year anniversary. Because it's our 3-year anniversary, I thought maybe I should introduce you to my partner. This is him.
What? I'm real? I'm embarrassed. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say.
That's right.
Yeah, I'm Mario. Hi, everyone.
So we thought what we would do today is share the story about how we met. I have my version.
And you're still sticking to it 3 years later, but...
It's true.
Okay.
Okay, well, why don't I tell my version and then you can tell your side of the story.
Sure. Yeah, that's good.
Okay. So I had my 2 best friends, Jake and Katya, over. Jake is gay and Katya is straight. And Katya had never heard of the dating app Grindr. She was like, show me what it's all about. So we got my phone out. My friend Jake and I were showing her how the app works. Jake was using my phone and my profile. And he pulled up Mario's profile and was showing her all the different features and all the things. And on Grindr, there's a feature where you can tap, which lets someone know that you're like interested in them. Jake was showing Katya that specific feature and he accidentally tapped Mario's profile. And he was like, oh, I'm so sorry. And I was like, what? And he was like, accidentally tapped his profile. And then when I looked, I was like, well, he's cute. Maybe he'll respond. And then he did.
Like a sucker. But
and that's initially how that's my version of how we met.
yeah, I believe you until the end where you said someone else tapped me by mistake.
It was. It was. I will say though, I had messaged Mario before and he ignored me.
I know. It wasn't the right time.
Of course.
Another thing I didn't tell Spencer right away is that I had actually followed him on social media before he tapped me on Grindr, and I loved what he was doing online. I thought he was super funny. So when he did tap me, I thought it was the right time. And also within I think the first 20 messages, I just said something like, I have something to admit.
Which is like so jarring of like, what's this gonna be?
Yeah, because I want to make you uncomfortable. But then the thing that I had to admit is that I actually knew who he was from social media, just to break the weirdness of all of it. And
yeah. And that was that. We joked that our first date, we ended up yelling at each other the whole time because we went to this bar near our house. Oh yeah, it turns out he lived across the street. I know, it was meant to be. So we went to this bar near our house and neither of us knew that it was live music that night. So we just stayed and tried to have the date, but we were yelling at each other across the table.
We got so much yelling out that one night that we saved all our energy, and now we haven't really been yelling at each other since.
No.
I'm just very, very grateful to have someone so wonderful in my life. And so funny
and likewise.
So lucky.
Likewise. That's how we met. Now you know.
And I'm real.
He is real. It's not fake.
Now that Mario went back to work, let's talk about him. Okay, I'm just kidding, but isn't he so cute? Now you might have noticed that Mario doesn't make a lot of appearances in my content. He might show up in a photo here or there, or a video of us traveling, or every now and then I might share a story about being an interabled couple. And if you're not familiar with that, that just means me being disabled and him being non-disabled. But for the most part, I don't really talk too much about our relationship, and that's on purpose. When I joined social media, a boundary that I set for myself was that if I ever was in a relationship, it wasn't something that I was going to share publicly. I'm happy to share a lot of my life with you, and obviously I do, but that aspect of my life was going to remain private as much as possible. Now, we both agreed that this story was a fun story, and a bunch of people have been asking, so we wanted to share it. But other than that, we're going to keep most of our relationship just for us. However, that being said, I want to share with you, how did I end up in a relationship in the first place? What was that journey like? For some of you, this might be new information, but disabled folks want a lot of the same things as non-disabled folks. For instance, many of us want to experience love and relationship and physical and emotional intimacy. And yes, many of us are queer and want to be in queer relationships or are in queer relationships. I want to share with you some of the things I had to think about and go through when I was dating before I met Mario. First, just physically meeting someone was super challenging. I would say 95% of the queer spaces here in Toronto are not accessible. And for a community that constantly is boasting that we are inclusive and tolerant, that wasn't my experience as a disabled person. I often felt like I was being kept out on purpose. So having the option to meet people online was so much better. So I was so grateful that I'm living in a time when dating apps exist, because this made dating that much more accessible for me, because I didn't have to leave my house and worry about barriers in queer spaces. When it came to going on physical dates, it was so much easier and less stress and less anxiety if I planned the dates. Sharing your access needs with someone can be super vulnerable. And it can also be a lot for someone else to handle and figure out. So it was just easier for me to plan everything. That way I knew that the space would be accessible. Now, some of my access needs were physically getting in the space and having access to a washroom. Now, there are a lot of places in Toronto where the washrooms aren't accessible. So the other thing that I had to think about is if we were meeting at a place halfway between us, and I knew that there wasn't going to be a washroom, I really had to be conscious of how much liquid I was drinking and how long it was going to take me to get back home. And that can be tricky when you're on a date because sometimes the date goes really well and you don't know how long it's going to last. Then there's weather. You can set up a date, but if it rains or if it snows, that can often make getting to the date for me very difficult. And in some cases, it meant that I had to cancel. And that could be really frustrating and confusing for folks that aren't used to dating someone with a disability and understanding how weather can affect whether they can show up or not. The other thing that I found challenging is learning when to disclose my disability. Now, in the beginning, I didn't think it would matter, and the photos I included in my profile were a mix of things, from standing on my hands to sitting in a wheelchair to close-up photos, and I just assumed people were noticing in the photos that I didn't have any legs, that I was sitting in a wheelchair. But what I found the first few times when it came time to stop chatting virtually and discuss meeting in person is then I would disclose my disability and be like, oh, I'm sure you saw from my photos that I don't have any legs. And the responses that I got were so shocking. Some people would just block me right away. Some people would ghost and stop responding. Some people would say really awful things. Some people would get really angry and say, why didn't I disclose that I had a disability at the beginning? And in my mind, I was like, well, I didn't think that it mattered, and what really has changed? You saw that I had a disability in my photos, like, that's on you. And that's when I began to realize, right, if I want to keep dealing with a lot of these ableist a-holes, then I could not disclose my disability and keep doing what I'm doing. But if I want to weed all those people out, I'm just going to start saying it right up front in my profile. Now, I had a bit of fun with this. One of the things that I written in my profile was, no, your eyes aren't deceiving you, I don't have any legs. And no, I don't like camping, but I can still pitch a tent. Meaning, you get it. Because that's a question I would also get when it came to online dating. So I thought, I'm just going to put it all out there and put it in my bio so that people know right away. Now, every now and then there were a few people that didn't fully read my bio or didn't quite understand and would have to ask questions. But I realized that, like, having a disability was a big deal for a lot of people. And that was really challenging to accept and to understand. But what it did help me realize is that by disclosing, and not everyone's comfortable doing that, but for me, by disclosing up front that I had a disability, it weeded out anybody that wasn't interested. So that way, they didn't waste my time. Now, one of the lovely things, as Mario mentioned earlier in this video, is that he knew who I was before we physically met. I didn't have to explain to him what happened to my legs. I didn't have to go through all of those awkward questions that people ask. A, because that's not the type of person Mario is. He wouldn't ask those questions because he knows they're inappropriate. And B, he already had the answers to them. So he understood a little bit of my access needs. He wasn't afraid to ask questions. And that really took the pressure off and made our first couple of dates that much more relaxing for me to understand that he knew a bit about my disability. So that's a little bit about my experience and what it was like dating. I'm really grateful that I have a partner now. Again, we've been together for 3 years. We've been living together for almost 2 years now, and he's just the best. But I also want to say dating for a lot of disabled folks and finding love or having emotional or intimate experiences is very challenging for a lot of disabled folks because there's a lot of ableism and intolerance out there. And I'm really grateful that I found someone who recognizes my disability, but doesn't see it as a weakness and sees it as one of my strengths. So that's a little bit about my dating history and what that experience was like for me. Also, if you're interested in learning from other disabled folks, my friend Andrew, and this is not an ad by any means, but stand by. So my friend Andrew wrote this incredible book called Notes from a Queer Cripple, How to Cultivate Queer Disabled Joy and Be Hot While Doing It. And Andrew does a really beautiful job of being extremely vulnerable and sharing their experience as being queer and disabled and what that's been like for them. So if you're looking for more stories of queer joy and dating and disability, I highly recommend this. And again, I'm not getting paid for that. He's just a friend, and I thought it was awesome. Folks, thank you so much for hanging out with me this week. Hope you all have a great Friday or whenever you're watching this. And like always, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do, and click the bell and like the video and leave a comment and all the things. And I'll see you next time. Bye.